feel more comfortable with that, that's fine, I don't mind. So how do we want to approach this? How do I want to approach this? The first thing I think is very important, something that we ignore most of the time when we come to write, is the emotional response we have to a text when we read a text. We're human beings, we respond emotionally. We get tired, we get interested, and part of that is intellectual, part of it is just how we feel in response to a text. And that's got a lot to do with how the text is structured. So before looking at examples of written text, I want to step aside from writing and look at another form of communication which is very obviously associated with an emotional response. So I hope that this works. I want us to listen to a couple of bits of music. So here's the first one. So you can already hear this is probably enough here. So that was a short, very short piece of music from a song or a piece called The Wizard from this record by the Barlett Trio from 1965. It's free jazz improvisation. Right, so why am I getting you to listen to free jazz improvisation from the 60s? I just want you to reflect just very briefly about how you respond to that kind of music. I'm guessing that most of you are not big fans of it because it's not a big demographic. Particularly, I'm interested in whether you feel engaged or included with that kind of music. Is it picking you up and carrying you along, or do you feel a little bit sort of excluded? If I were to make a comparison with literature here, I could show you, and I did in the longer version of this talk, a text from Ulysses by James Joyce. Stream of consciousness writing with no punctuation. It's the same kind of thing. It kind of pushes the audience outside, and you're a spectator looking in. You can work at it, and you can work out what's going on, and once you've done that, then you're engaged. But it's not immediate. It doesn't pick you up and take you along with it. Not what I would recommend as a model for writing about science. You will not be surprised to hear that. What would make a better model? Something like this. Highly patterned. Very obviously structured. Okay. You can see that in the way that the music is written. This is Bach's handwritten manuscript for this piece of music. Okay, so that is a piece of solo violin music by Johann Sebastian Bach, performed by Julia Fischer. And what I hope you can pick up from hearing it and also from seeing it is very highly structured. But the thing that I want to pick out from here is there's a lot of repetition. Not straight repetition, but repetition with development and variation. It's the key to most music, certainly most Western music. And here's another piece. And you can see the same theme coming again and again, but being complexified and developed at each set. Okay, so repetition, hopefully you picked up enough from that to see that there was a motif that was being repeated in a different part of the scale, in complexified with other variations and so on. But it's that repetition of key motifs and phrases that enhances flow. It helps the audience relate things from one to the other. It's what helps us feel located in the music and follow it and feel that we're part of a coherent, cohesive narrative. Features that I want to pick up on. First of all, it starts fast. You've got a clear presentation of the themes, and those are repeated and developed and complexified. That repetition interlocks each phrase with the one that came before, and the development drives the narrative forward. New themes arise through this development, so they're introduced in a context. And that flow and development creates expectations on the part of the listeners that are met. We're not aware that we're expecting what comes next. It's happening too fast. But the effect of that, for me anyway, there are all sorts of emotional responses that one might have to that music. That particular piece, the last one is quite a severe one, the one before that is quite a jolly, happy piece. I'm not really focusing on that. Overall, this music, and play music by Mozart as well, but Bach in particular, I think, it's a very clear part of my response to it is that it's satisfying. I feel that I'm being looked after. I'm being picked up and taken through a story, and I know where I am. And it's that sense of of being taken care of and finding the experience satisfactory, that I think is a very useful thing to have in mind when we're writing, because as readers we appreciate the same kind of feeling if we read a well-written text. Okay, so does this idea of repetition work in language? Certainly in oratory we use repetition in the same sort of way. And this is an extremely famous speech by Martin Luther King Jr. I have a dream, I have a dream. And just look at the way that it's repeated all the way through, sometimes with very long sentences and sometimes just, I have a dream today. Very powerful use of repetition. And I think there's no coincidence that the guy was a preacher. There's a sort of incantation quality to this. But we need to go towards written text in our sort of world of science to see whether we can see use of repetition here. Because I know from long experience working with many that people don't like to repeat terms in their text. They feel that they mustn't. Well, here's a successful piece of science writing, popular science writing by Jerry Coyne, a book published a few years ago, Why Evolution is True. We'll start with this. Let's start with that fishy fetus of all vertebrates, limbless and sporting a fish-like tail. Perhaps the most striking fish-like feature is a series of 5 to 7 pouches separated by grooves that lie on each side of the embryo near its future head. These pouches are called the branchial arches, but we'll call them arches for short. Each arch contains. You can see that there's a lot of terms being repeated during this text, and he's talking about the development of the gill arches in vertebrates, and he goes on to talk about the implications of that for evolutionary theory. A good trick to do when you're analysing a text and when you're revising your own text is to write each sentence of a paragraph on a separate line. And then you can draw connections between them. Just looking for repeated terms with related terms, this is one way you could do it. We've certainly got fish-like, and we've got grooves and pouches, and that comes up again. Arch, pouches again. Gills comes in, and we can draw all these lines. It might look a little bit chaotic. It certainly doesn't look as structured and as ordered as Bach's sheet music for his violin. But bear with me. First thing I want you to look at, though, is that we can see an overall structure to the paragraph. We have a beginning bit, it's then developed, and we have a summary at the end. Simplified, it kind of goes like this. Vertebrate embryos go through a fish-like stage. A prominent feature of that is the branchial arches. He goes on to talk about them, to talk about what happens to the fish, and then he summarises it. You can simplify that even further. He presents a theme, he develops that theme towards an outcome, supported by repetition of terms to make sure that you know where we are. And at the end, there's a resolution where he summarises and tells you what the outcome, the significance is at that point. And you can simplify that or schematicize that even further. He starts off by telling you what he's going to tell you. Tell them what you're going to tell them, then he tells us, and at the end, he tells us what he's just told us. And this is a classic sort of paragraph structure. I've cut it out because I didn't think I was going to have time, but in fact, I could show you pieces of music. I don't think it's going to take too much to stretch your imagination to see how this can be, and you can compare this very easily with pieces of music that do the same thing. A theme is introduced, it's developed, there's variation, then you come back at the end. You know that you come to the end because it's sort of referring back to the beginning. Okay, that's all fine as far as the overall structure is concerned, but what about all this sort of messy connections here? It doesn't look very ordered. But it kind of is. If we just take a couple of sentences, like these two, for example, and if we map them out, say, well, this is the subject, verb, and complement bit, and then we can simplify them further. Essentially, those two sentences say the pouches are called arches, and then the next one says each arch contains tissues. Now we can see connections. It's quite an ordered connection. This one starts with one thing, ends with another. That thing then becomes the subject of the next sentence. That is known as a topic swing, because it's gone from one to the other, and that one swings back to the beginning of the next sentence. Okay, take that second sentence we just looked at, and the next one that comes after it, do the same thing. Each arch contains tissues, the first arch becomes the jaw, the rest the other arches become gill structures. We simplify those clauses, what we get is this. You could easily have written the other arches, and that would have been fine. You didn't have to repeat it, but it could have done. This is a string. So we have a swing and a string. And these are just two ways that you can order content in your presentation, in your text. Okay. So I want us to go back and talk about this idea of art. How does this idea of linking structures within sentences and in paragraphs link to the idea of communication rather than writing as art? Is there an art to writing in science? I don't know how familiar you people are with this set of definitions of the arts. Most of us, when we think of arts, we think of the fine arts. This scheme goes back to classical times, Aristotle, and it's basically the basis of most people's education, if they were fortunate enough to have had an education right from classical times right through to the Renaissance and beyond. Fine arts, we still use this term, and the emphasis is on providing something of beauty, something pleasing. And here there are 7. The mechanical arts are just your trades, skills. And notice that here we've got editing and writing. I could put my trade in there as well. You can have an infinite number of these. This is just providing a service. What I'm interested in here is this, the liberal arts. Again, 7. But whereas these two, the mechanical arts and the fine arts, are all about moving outwards, if you like, either creating something of beauty or something of utility. The liberal arts are to do with self-improvement. So they're more inward looking. But this 4, called the quadrivium, are to do with maths and really science. I mean, if we were to translate that into modern day vocabulary, we'd probably think of this in terms of most modern science. Music is the application of the theory of number. Astronomy is considered as the application of the theory of geometry. So we would probably say most science would go there. But I'm interested in this group of 3, called the triumvium, the arts of language. Logic, being truth, grammar, correctness, and rhetoric, effectiveness. If logic is how to think, grammar is how to combine words correctly, then rhetoric is about how to combine words, sentences, and paragraphs into a whole composition, having unity, coherence, and the desired emphasis, as well as clarity, force, and beauty. This is from a book on rhetoric by Sister Miriam Joseph. So rhetoric is our key skill that we need to master in order to control the way we write, the way we communicate. And one of the most important things to observe is that the rhetorical conventions that we use will vary depending on the context. It's different when you're giving a presentation, when you're writing, whether you're writing a letter, whether you're writing a research article, and they also differ between different cultures and different languages. So we need to examine these in order to get more skills, if you like, in how to control our communication. These guys really are the underpinning for anything we do over here. So rhetoric, clearly, we're going to apply that, if you like, in a sort of left-brained, mechanical aspect in terms of controlling the mechanics of how we write, and also in creating something that we hope will be pleasing. So now it's time for us to move on to home territory, to look at some proper science text. This is from an article in Vaccine, selected more or less at random. We can do the same trick as before. Rather than read through it like that, we'll just put each sentence and paragraph on the screen. And the first thing we can do is highlight the beginnings of each sentence, the subject. So what do you notice? What's the first thing that you notice looking through those? What kind of structure have we got? How is this one related to the previous one? It's an example. It's a specific example of the general idea introduced at the beginning. So we can see this connection here. And here we've got CPG co-administration. Well, that's this guy repeated, but developed. It's not just the same thing, it's a development of the idea. Again, it's a string. Then put CPG, and then we get a kind of summary at the end. Okay. What else do you notice about this? One thing I would like you to notice is that almost every sentence, with this one exception, They begin with the subject. They don't begin with long subordinate clauses. They go straight in there. The other thing about most of these is that they're short. Look at the structure of this sentence. Subject, verb, and the rest. All of the kind of complexity is over here. And I run out of code very quickly in trying to encode this. Don't worry, because we can analyze it in another way. We take this sentence, and now we write it right across the top. You can't really read it. Doesn't matter. We can map it, and there are different ways of mapping a sentence. And I'm not recommending that you spend any time learning how to map sentences, but it's useful to see it. This looks something like that. We've got a thing at the beginning, CPG co-administration. Simple, short subject at the beginning. We've got a verb. He could have simplified it, the authors could have simplified it even further. They could have just said enhances, but they chose to go with has been found to enhance, which just sounds a little bit more formal and sciencey. Could have easily just said enhance. Then you've got the complement, and then you've got all this complex stuff over here. So we start with a short, specific, concrete subject that reflects the text and announces the story of the sentence. That's how a character. There's a different way of thinking about the subject of the sentence. It's the character. Whose story are we telling? We get straight on to the verb, which we use to articulate the action that's taking place. What's happening in that sentence? Most of the time we write without thinking about what the event is. Make a decision about that event, make the verb articulate that event, and that helps build the story as it goes forward. Then we get the complement that expresses the outcome, the impact, and the consequences. That's the point. So this is a new, or perhaps new to way of conceiving of the structure of a sentence. Start with character, event, then point. And then over here we've got the dependent clauses that add clarification or detail. People sometimes refer to this kind of structure, which is very common in this kind of writing in English, as right branching. Okay. It starts fast. It's true that there is this kind of tendency for sentences in English text and this kind of text in English to be short. But the most important thing is not whether the sentence is long or short, it's how short the beginning is. You want the sentence to start fast, to go from subject to verb as quick as possible. Then you can spend a bit of time working out what's going on. Okay. Another introduction, and this is a one-paragraph introduction from an article about the lymphatic system and the origin of the lymphatic system in vertebrates, studying zebrafish. Lymphatic starts off talking generally about the lymphatic system, it's essential for immune responses, etc., etc. Then it says, despite its importance, the origins of the lymphatic system remain controversial. So we're still on the theme of the lymphatic system, we're talking about its origins. Next sentence talks about one model, the one after that talks about another model, and one after that says the debate, in other words, the fact that we don't know what the origins of the lymphatic system is, has remained unresolved because we lack a model organism. And then we get the zebrafish. Right? Show you that we've got lymphatic system, origins of the lymphatic system, a model of the origins of the lymphatic system, an alternative view of the origins of the lymphatic system. The debate over the origins of lymphatic endothelial cells remains unresolved, and then you get the switch to zebrafish. There's a kind of build-up of tension here. We've got a general idea, then we get one problem, then we get one possible solution to that problem, and another one, and then the fact that we haven't answered this question yet, and then suddenly we get the zebrafish. It's not a zebrafish anymore, it's kind of like a knight in shining armor coming in, providing the possible solution to this problem. If I map this out, or try to map this out, it looks something like this. Lymphatic system links to origin of the lymphatic system, a model of this, and then we've got more detail in here. It's repetitive, but there's more and more complexity, more and more development of the idea at each stage until we get here, there's this kind of break. And the big break comes here at the end when we switch and start talking about what we did. I don't know if you're going to be convinced by this, but I think that this is very, very similar to the underlying the idea of the traffic. Very similar to this that I showed earlier. This idea that theme and add to it, you go back and you go over it again, building more and more content, more and more force, until you get to a point which comes about. Okay, so there's our mapped out sentences. And who's a character? What do I mean by character? What can be a character in your sentences? Harry Potter can be a character in a sentence. Freedom, an abstract concept. Science things like mean video intensity, involvement of TH cells in acquired immunity, CPG co-administration that you saw now, the first arch that you saw in Cherry Twinstead. Anything can be a character, so long as you've prepared the ground enough. Okay, now it's time to talk. I mean, I'm assuming that most of you are Spanish speakers. It doesn't matter if you're not. There are going to be a few slides with Spanish, but it doesn't really matter that much. And things are different in other languages, certainly we're in different genres and different situations. This is the information that was posted on my door and with my previous gas supplier. Estimado cliente, habiéndonos personado en su domicilio el día bla 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 bla, sin que haya sido posible proceder a la lectura del computador con el fin de evitar bla bla bla. We finally get to the beginning of the sentence there. I'm not saying this is bad. I think this is just how it is. I mean, it's actually quite elegant. It's Spanish. Okay, but it's different, right? Okay. And in fact, one thing I would say about Spanish and other Romance languages is that there's much more flexibility in word order. You can do this, and it can kind of work in Spanish. Try and do this in English. And okay, you might say, well, yeah, that's the gas supplier. What about science? It's not that kind of science. This is from an article published in Revista Española de Cardiología. I need to give you a bit of background. The background is that it's about a disease called tibialis brachiosular syndrome, which is chest pain and electrical alterations that suggest that you might be having a heart attack. But when you're examined, the doctors find no occlusion and no biochemical changes that suggest a heart attack, and it's transient, and it was initially thought to be benign. It affects women, 10 times more likely to have this disease than men. And what's happened is that longer-term studies have shown that people who have this condition go on to have more complications and higher mortality. So it doesn't seem that it is such a benign condition. And so then we get this paragraph at the end of the introduction. Por tanto, una vez abandonada la impresión inicial de benignidad de esta afección y sabiendo que la reacción de complicaciones potencialmente graves, principalmente durante la inmunología, puede condicionar la evolución del paciente y ser campeones. Okay, here. The sentence actually started here, so it's a slow starting sentence. I could translate that into English, respecting that structure, and it would look something like that. Thus, with the early view of this condition as a benign disorder now rejected and in the knowledge of the occurrence of potentially serious complications, principally in the first 11 days, can affect the patient's clinical course, we decided to. That's a grammatically correct English sentence. I'm quite proud of it because it took me a while. I think it's got a certain elegance, and if we were to go back and read English literature from the 19th century, Thackeray, Dickens, and stuff, you'd find sentence after sentence after sentence like this. So it's not that it's bad, it's just it's not good for the purpose that we want, which is to communicate effectively in the 21st century in a medical journal. So how would that work? Well, first of all, let's map this, just so that you see what's going on. First thing you notice, it's even worse. Now you can't even see the words at all. It starts with thus, which kind of stands outside of the sentence. And then we get all this bit from we. We decided to analyse that this bit's all right. This is pretty much the same as what we saw before. We don't need to go into the detail of it, but we decided to analyse where the sentences associate not only with differences in the root, but also the problem is all of this over there, that brown bit, which looks like that. Hanging on these two little words here, you've got all of this stuff that you're asking people to kind of hold in their head before you get to the main story. I don't really know, I'm not enough of an expert on linguistics to be able to say why this kind of structure is so difficult in English compared with how it would be in Spanish and probably French. I think it's something to do with the lack of inflections and complications in English, so that it's harder to manage all of this stuff, but I'm not sure. Anyway, you can see the difference. And this is what the translator in the Revista Española de Cardiología came up with. the early view of TPS has been nine, so it has therefore been rejected. So it's a fairly long character, but it's a character, it starts. And there is now recognition. This is called a dummy subject. The patient's clinical course can be affected. Stop. Now we've got a little introductory video, but it's short. Okay, so it's just a different way of piecing together information. So other ways in which rhetorical conventions between one language and another don't always overlap. Well, one of the things that's particularly common with Spanish, of course, is being a Latin-derived language, we use a lot of these impersonal reflexive verbs. So you would say that in Spanish, sea descrito una infracción de bloqueo de beta en pacientes de edad avanzada con insuficiencia cardíaca. Direct translation looks something like that. How am I doing for time?
I think 1 minute.
1 minute, okay. We'll just have a look at this one.
Minus 1 minute.
One last example. If you correct it for the grammar, you'll get something like that. But this would be the final translation that appeared in the journal. Again, it's from the red. Under use is your character. So looking to see, well, what's the term? If you can possibly get a thing, an idea, a concrete, specific character at the beginning of your sentence, and then move on from that, you're going to find that you will find the text in which you are. And I think we'll have to stop now because there's no more time. Okay, I'm just going to quickly flash on. One more thing that I want to show you. Just these. We looked at these examples where we've got this idea of a string. We looked at example in Jerry Poynting of a string where you have a term at the end of one sentence and use that at the beginning. Another thing that you can do is refer back to the verb, turn the verb into a noun at the beginning of the next sentence, which again gives you a nice link back together. It's the use of repetition strategically. And then the last one, just finish up. No time, please. Okay. There. Okay. So these are the questions that we looked at the beginning. Lots of things can go wrong, but if we analyse them, we can work out strategies to deal with it. I don't know if you would call this kind of writing art, but there's certainly a set of skills to it that we can learn and apply. And the answer to the last question, skills in writing obviously can help us retaining and achieve more effective communication. So there you go. Yes. And I'll finish up the picture of Bach because he's an inspiring figure. Okay. Thank you very much.
So it's very useful talk. It's very practical. Are there any questions? Any comments, especially the younger researchers? Just very quick. What would be your main recommendations for our younger trainees for improving the skills, particularly in English and Spanish?
When you read papers, notice whether you enjoy reading it or not. Okay? So if you come across an article in your field or outside your field and you enjoy it, try and notice how you respond to it. I don't mean just like you enjoy it because it's so important in your field, but do you enjoy the way that the text, develop a sensitivity to the text and how you're responding to it, and then analyse it. Do that right through that. Split the text out on a line. It's very easy today. You just download the PDF, copy the text, split out, and look at how the meaning is built. Look at how people have constructed their sentences, and then you can use that as a model. So that would be, it's kind of splitting your mind between reading for content, which you do as scientists anyway, and reading for the way the text is structured, which you can then use to apply to what you learn.
Okay, so thank you very much, Simon, for this very useful advice.